Hi, my name's Alfreda, and I'm an Icelandic Roots member. And I would like to share with all of you our journey to Meadows in September the 22nd, 2025. But before I start, I'd like to refresh your memories of the journeys of the first Europeans to visit North America. And this map was made by Michael Wills, which I found online. We're going to start with Erik the Red, the beginning, because Erik the Red is a very important character in Icelandic sagas. He was outlawed from Iceland for killing some people. Now, outlawry literally means outside the law. And what that means is that obviously Erik the Red had no protection from the law. So he could be killed if he stayed in Iceland. So he chose to go to look for this land people have been talking about. And he went there and found it. And obviously, because it was a lesser outlawry charge, he could return within 3 years. After 3 summers, actually, it was. And which he did. And he came back to Iceland and told the people about this land, which he named Greenland, probably the largest real estate fraud during the Viking Age. But anyways, he convinced 25 shiploads of people to leave Iceland and come and settle in his new land here. And only 17 of those ships actually made it there. But they created a settlement. And the next person is Bjarni Herjolfsson, who was a Viking raider, and he had decided he had had enough and was going to retire from all these raids and return to Iceland to his father's farm, where he hoped to be able to take over his father's farm, and his father could retire. He was very wealthy now, and he arrived in Iceland with his ship was just full of wealth, only to discover that his father had left in one of those ships to go to Greenland. And so he left without unloading his ship and left to go for Greenland. And on the way, he encountered a bad storm, which threw him off course. And when he came through the storm, he noticed that didn't recognize any of the land. There were none of the pointers that he'd asked people to get to Greenland with. So, but he did not unload. He did not get off. Did not take a ship onto the land and land in this new land. Instead, he continued north until he encountered a pointer that where he could find Greenland, and he eventually arrived there. And during those cold winter nights, obviously, he was telling stories about all this wondrous land he had seen, and which piqued Leif Erikson's curiosity and triggered his ambition. And he ended up buying Bjarni's ship and left from the Western settlement and went on to his own journey to these new lands. And along the way, he names all these lands and arrives at this island, which we now know as Newfoundland. And at the very farthest northern tip, there's he builds his encampment, and that area is known as Meadows. It's just simply named after the village that exists there. But from this point, they go on their expeditions to discover other parts of this new land. And the final person I want to talk about is Thorfinn Karlsefni. He is an Icelander, and he came from Iceland. And his journey is the green one, and he goes to the Western settlement in Greenland because he's a trader, and he wants to trade his goods for their goods, and for ivory and the seal skins, which is like gold. And so in the meantime, while he's there, he meets Guðríður, who becomes known as Guðríður the Far Traveler. They get married. And together they decide they're going to follow Leif's journey to this new land. They ask permission to use his encampment, which he does give, but just ask them don't use his great hall. And so they're there for 3 years. And during that time, their son is born, Snorri. He is the first European to be born in North America. But they do eventually come back to Iceland. and don't spend much time there. And they returned to Greenland, sorry, and then they eventually returned to Iceland. Now I'd like to talk about my tour. We were in Iceland for 3 weeks, and part of that was about 10 days on an Icelandic Roots tour, and the other 10 days was our own little tour on the eastern fjords in the south. And we left Reykjavik by ship to return home to North America. Now, this ship follows basically the same route that the people here followed during the Viking Age, and ended up in Qaqortoq and arrived. It was storming. It was very bad weather, and even some of the tours had to be canceled because of the bad weather, like the glacial tours. But I decided to have a conversation with all the weather gods, pagan or Christian, and ask them to improve this weather, because I mean, if it didn't improve, there's a chance we would not get into Lands of Meadows. But as we took 2 days to leave Qaqortoq to get to Lands of Meadows, and the weather improved greatly. It was gorgeous. I've come across on the internet a Viking warrior's bucket list. I found it on Cartoon Stock, and obviously it sounds pretty right for the 8th to the 12th century. The only thing out of one of their bucket list was the burn. Well, yeah, the only thing that relates to my bucket list is that my burning desire to see this heritage site. We have finally arrived at Lands of Meadows, my bucket list for 2025. We are now at the information center, and just before you enter, there's brick walls, and there are two plaques, and this plaque here is the really very interesting one that caught my attention. In 1978, Lands of Meadows became the first cultural site in the world to be inscribed upon the World Heritage List of the UNESCO Convention. The first cultural site in the world. That I did not know, and that was very important for me. And we already know that it's the only authenticated site of Norse settlement in North America. Plus, the Norse travelers traveled here around the year 1000, and the remains of their sod buildings are the earliest known European structures in North America, and their ironworks also the first known working site in New World. And this is also the site from where they launched expeditions, resulting in the first contact between Aboriginal North Americans and Europeans. We have just entered the information center. We're just in the front entrance, and I come across a couple of characters here, and it looks like I'm interrupted a chat with one of the explorers, maybe Eve Leaf himself, talking to an Aboriginal. It looks like they're using sign language, which would have been their first method of understanding each other. From the confused look on my face, though, I obviously did not understand their sign language. Maybe I'm in their way. Time to leave, to learn something else, and get rid of that confused look. We've made our way inside the information center, and it's like a mini museum. And as you can see, there is a Sagas, the Vinland Saga and the Greenland Saga, and they're hanging in the window, but obviously they're not real, because after our Icelandic Roots tour of the Arni Magnusson Manuscript Museum, we all discovered just how important it is to avoid sunlight in the preservation of ancient manuscripts. And those storyboards, they were very informative, and there were a lot of them. And notice the one I am presenting. There's a framed mini tapestry. I think the Vinland Saga would make an interesting one, don't you? Then there was a miniature Viking ship. The site layout was quite a focal point, and just to the right is a gift shop where the price of souvenirs is not overly inflated prices. And then to the left, there was also a separate room where you could watch a 15-minute video. Highly informative. You could easily spend a lot of time here absorbing information before you even start your walk to the site. We have left the information center and started our walk towards the ruins in the reconstructed site. And you can see the boardwalks are really well laid out, and there were guides situated all along the walks. And the only question I really asked was about this plant here, and it was he said it was crowberries, and according to him they were rather tasteless. But I figure once if you're going to make them into jam with lots of sugar, they must have some flavor then. On the walk will take you to the mounds of the original foundations, and you can clearly see the foundation of a longhouse where Leif Erikson would have called home while in camp. And I did go for a walk in them, and I cannot tell you what an amazing feeling it was to walk about inside the mound. Imagine walking in Leif's footsteps, or Guthrie the far travelers, even Freya's, despite her tragic expedition. So much history here. And then to the other one, the plaque just identifies it as a smaller mound as an ironworks shop. We have finally arrived at this historic site, Lanzo Meadows. It's been on my bucket list for many years. It's called a camp or an encampment by scholars because it was never meant to be a settlement. Leif was here to harvest timber, a commodity that was sorely lacking in Greenland, and to hunt for different animal skins. They came across wild grains, and they even came across wild grapes, which they found on one of their extended expeditions. Once grapes were discovered, though, quantities of wine was made, providing a luxury afforded only by rich chieftains like Erik the Red or his son Leif, who would share this liquid gold during feasts to show off their wealth and power. The buildings were recreated based on the foundations they discovered. They did not recreate every building, only one hall and two huts. Archaeologists dig most summers and are still finding artifacts that help them explain life as it would have been in the 10th century and early 11th century. And notice to the left photo, there's a fire pit, and that the archaeologists have discovered indigenous fire pits. When the Leif was not there, which he was not there very much, so they would have lived around that area, and they would build their own fire pits. And here's a view of the longhouse and an interior room view. Here we see a couple recreating life in the longhouse. Everyone in the camp would have had a multitude of chores. In this instance, the male reenactor looks to be making rope, and she looks to be knitting a trim, or she's using an all-binding needle. It's an old form of knitting during medieval times. Now, this contraption on the left was very interesting to all of us tourists, and we were all huddled around it. As a matter of fact, it was very difficult to get a picture without somebody around it. And we were all discussing what it could be, and when some brilliant person came up with the idea that it was a lathe, which makes absolute sense. And for turning wood, maybe they would be making axe handles, mate legs for beds, or for, any kind of furniture, and even bowls maybe. And this other photo is, I found it listed because I wasn't sure what it was, and I found it online, and it was a carpentry workshop. I'd like to point out this is a very interesting map I found of the foundations, and I'd like to tell you what they've defined them as. And for example, A is identified as a large hall, and it was built for someone of high social status. And it contained a small private room and communal living and working quarters for the rest of the crew. One of the rooms was littered with slag and may have been used for ironworking. Jasper chips prove, though, from the jasper chips from the fire starters show that the crew came from Iceland. And now B is a lower status living quarters and a place for roasting bog before smelting. And C was just another hut, lower status housing at the site, perhaps for quarters for several slaves. D is the smallest of the three halls, probably built for a crew of laborers. Judging by the jasper chips around the fire, they too were from Iceland. This hall contained a large storeroom, possibly for furs and perishable items. Another room was littered with woodworking debris, both inside and out. Now, E is another small hut, but it was probably used by women as a workshop and perhaps as living quarters as well, because stone weights were found inside that were part of a loom. Now, F is the largest hall, the largest building, twice the size of Erik the Red's home in Greenland, and equivalent to a chieftain's hall in Iceland. The leader of the expedition probably lived in this hall with his crew. Possibly, it could have been Leif the Lucky's hall, because Jasper chips show that its inhabitants came from Greenland. And it contained a private room for the leaders, a large central room that could serve as a banquet hall, two large storage rooms, and a lean-to shed for boat repair. G it was just another workshop and a living space for lowest status crew. And J, all the way down to the corner here, is this small isolated building contained a furnace for producing iron from bog ore. A simple smelter stood in the middle of the floor, and a charcoal kiln was nearby. The amount and type of slag found suggests that a single smelt took place. Very little iron was manufactured, only about 100 to 200 nails, they figured. Now, number 4, all the way up at the top, is the buildings that were reconstructed and that are available for the visitors to tour. Now, this is an aerial view of the reconstructed buildings. It'll give you a better idea of what I was trying to explain them from the previous slide. And now we are about to leave the Lands of Meadows historical site and arrive in Norstead. Now, as you can see, we are in Norstead. We have left the historical site. We're now in private land. And it was built in 2011 by private owners called the Finland Foundation. And the purpose of Norstead, they are dedicated to bringing history out of the exhibit case and into the hands of visitors, offering an authentic and tangible glimpse into Viking culture. I sourced this out of Parks Canada. And this is a recreation of a Viking port of trade from approximately 790 to 1066 AD. You will notice that the buildings are all built with timber, with turf roofs and sides for insulation. Timber was readily available here and in parts of Scandinavia during that time, whereas in Iceland, due to lack of timber, they often used driftwood in its place to form the structural posts and the roof beams to balance the weight of the turf roof. Then layers of turf and a herringbone pattern were used to build the walls as well as to provide insulation. If anyone could afford to buy timber, it was made into lumber to build the inside walls or the floor. In Greenland, a combination of stones, turf, and soil was used for constructing their buildings. As you can see, we have arrived here at the boathouse. And here they would have built ships as well as smaller boats. This one is called the Snorri ship, which is a replica of the type of Viking ship they would have used to sail from Greenland to Lands of Meadows. The ship was donated by the Newfoundland Foundation after a 1998 voyage that followed the possible expedition from Greenland to Lands of Meadows. Notice in the vessel the opening. That is to demonstrate where they would place the ballast. They used small, smooth rocks as ballast to keep their ship stable until it was necessary to load a vessel. Then they would simply remove them and leave them on the shore. But whenever they unloaded their ballast, they had to replace the ballast. And they could find similar rocks along any shoreline to create another ballast without any difficulty. A simple process, really. Now we've entered this huge longhouse, and it's a replica of a chieftain's house during the Viking Age. And this is the mistress of the house or the hall, and she is informing us of what we can see here, and it'll give us a lot of information. And obviously here to the left is either a slave or could be a relative, because I'm sure a lot of family lived with or worked for the chieftain. Now here is the chieftain's high seat, and the purpose of its elevated position is to show off his power over all the people. One thing I do not understand is why do these reconstructed turf buildings continue to show iron helmets? According to scholars, the Vikings did not wear metal helmets in battle. Or very few, as only one or two Viking helmets have been found. And leather helmets possibly they would have worn because they're lighter. But this one here, this metal one that's shown in the photo, has no nose guard. And there was another one with a nose guard. Unfortunately, none of the men who were trying to model it could fit it. Maybe they were built for children, not for these adult tourists. Although one thing that the Vikings did use that was metal was the Viking, the chainmail. And here, their workers, notice all the colorful wool that has been dyed from natural sources, sourced from the area itself. But anyways, these workers were nail binding, and it's a precursor to knitting. You could use a wooden needle, a horn, or a needle made from horn or ivory, and they would simply make a series of single stitches and create woolen mitts and socks, etc. And on the loom, where they wove fabric for clothing, sails, even the base for tapestries, which would be hung from walls to brighten the rooms, as well as keeping cold drafts out. They also had smaller looms for making trim for clothing. And above you can see one of these unfinished tapestries, and as well as the needle used in nail binding. In the Viking age, it would, like I said, would have been made from wood, horn, or ivory. This is my needle, and it's made from plastic. Now here's the blacksmiths at work. I mean, obviously they made all the metal objects required, weapons, sometimes a sword for the chieftain. Very few people could afford to carry a sword, but mostly it would have been axe heads, and for workers, and obviously for warriors, and nails, which were used in the building of ships. The small room was used to make the small loom over here was used for making trims for clothing, even belts. Women would tie it around their waist and hang utensils from it, such as a pair of scissors, a spoon, a bag to hold their needles, some thread, maybe even a few coins if they had any. By the year 1000, Christianity had been embraced by Icelanders, but in Scandinavia they had already had converted before the Icelanders had. So churches were built. And here's a view of the longhouse. There was also a wall made of stacked logs to practice axe throwing somewhere in here. And I failed miserably at this art, whereas Tom succeeded. I put it down to his early years of playing darts. There is a technique to throwing darts, so obviously there's a technique to throwing axes. And here is a chicken coop and a sheep pen and a garden. Apparently chickens were kept during the Viking Age. This one I had to ask about, having never seen a chicken coop by any turf farm in Iceland. I did see a sheep barn while in Iceland, though, at Galtastaðir, which is a family farm we visited in these fjords where a turf house still exists. I do not know whether this shed was built before or after my great-grandfather's time, though. Helgi Instad and Anne Stein were the Norwegian archaeologists who claimed guidance from the Vinland Saga to discover this historic site in 1960. Their excavations between 1961 and 1968 provided the proof of a Viking voyage to North America around the year 1000 AD, centuries before Columbus, also proving the Vinland Saga's historical value to the world. But according to the archaeologist Brigitte Wallace, the dig at lands of Meadows was not an exercise of looking at archaeology through the lens of the Vinland Sagas. It is looking at the Vinland Sagas through the spyglass of archaeology, and through their spyglass they continue to make new discoveries, further cementing the provenance of the site at Lands of Meadows. Thank you everyone for joining me today on my journey to my bucket list of Lands of Meadows. I had two previous ones. That was Machu Picchu in 2012, and then I had Egypt down, which I will never do now because I've discovered in order to see what they really have discovered, I have to go into the bowels of the pyramids, and I'm claustrophobic, so I guess it'll never happen. But since I've removed these off my bucket list now, I've since added places where the Vikings have been, and hopefully, and there's another one. Since I've been to Greenland, why not touch Antarctica? And between those few on my bucket list now, a few cruises hopefully will uh, take them off that for me. And once again, thanks for being here. Thank you.